Part 3, more Chester. So we left it in 1854 when Chester's beginning to burgeon. And this brings me back personally to the very first piece of silver I ever bought. I sold everything as a teenager, but for some sentimental reason, or maybe because nobody would buy it, I kept the first piece of silver I ever bought, which was a Vesta case. Very uninspiring Vesta case, and it is by Turner and Simpson of Birmingham, but it's marked in Chester, marked on the lip there, as you'll see. And you'll see lots of this: cigarette cases, Vesta cases, cheroot holders, sovereign holders, menu holders, all sorts of novelties that were produced in Birmingham but assayed alongside a Birmingham maker's mark. They register in Chester with full Chester hallmarks because of the prestige. So that is the paradox that I was talking about Chester silver. You know, as a little kid, the first thing I bought was ostensibly Chester. It's not really, it's Birmingham. And I would look at this now as a piece of Birmingham silver, but it was assayed in Chester. And that's the difference. You can go out tomorrow and you can buy 100 things from the late Victorian, early Edwardian, even the 20s, 30s. You can buy 100 things bearing a Chester Assay Office hallmark, but it's not Chester silver. Chester silver, at least to me, really finishes in a major sense in the 1850s. As soon as Birmingham and Sheffield are using the assay office, the local trade, it's minuscule. There are still working silversmiths. There are people like William Smith of Liverpool that make very interesting pieces of locally made silver that's assayed in Chester. But you have to look for these things. There's still the Lowe family who are producing, really they're the stalwarts of the Chester Assay Office from the 19th century through into the 20th century. And they're producing things, again, this is mine. This came in a job lot many years ago. They're producing a lot of replica silver. They're looking backwards now. So this is a replica of an early medieval diamond point spoon. And it's by Lowe and Company. And you'll notice now that when Lowe make things in the 20th century, they are making a feature out of the hallmarks. It's all about having a piece of Chester assayed silver. And you'll notice, and this might be the one you can actually see, the lovely, big, proud Chester Assay Office mark struck right in the middle of the bowl. And these are what we call prestige marks, really. The whole shtick of this wasn't buying the spoon. It was buying the spoon because it was made and hallmarked, assayed in Chester and had those Chester marks. So even by the date of this, and we are 1937, and the assay office, as I said, closed in 1962. Even in the 30s, really the trade in Chester for silver was all about looking back and the prestige of it and just having a bit of proper, genuine Chester silver, although it is quite likely that Lowe had these made in Sheffield, or probably Sheffield as it's a spoon, and shipped in and assayed them themselves. Actually, in 1962, when Lowe's realised that the assay office was being closed, you will find, I've had one myself, you'll find small Armada dishes, copies of the Elizabethan Armada dishes that were produced by Comins in London. And they basically got Comins to send them up, loads of them, and put the last ever set of Chester hallmarks that there would be with the last date letter, and they furiously assayed these things just as souvenirs for people. So even when it was closing, there was a sense that something was being lost, but also the stuff that they were marking had never been made in Chester. It was all churned out by Comins in London, which is makes it less special, I suppose. Because of this paradox, collecting proper Chester silver, which is really from the earliest period up to about the 1850s, in some cases the 1870s, when you've got regional goldsmiths that are still using the Chester Assay Office, and there are a handful like William Smith of Liverpool. It's difficult, and it's difficult for a reason, and the reason is the Grosvenor Museum in Chester, which I bear no ill will towards, I promise you, but they have been collecting, rightly, as a civic institution, a well-funded one, privately funded one. I don't know if they are privately funded or not. I shouldn't have said that. But well-funded, they have been acquiring lots of Chester silver when it comes onto the market since, I think, the 70s. Now, the problem with that is museums never sell things. Or it's wonderful because we can all go to Chester and we can all look at it, and that's right and proper. Let me underscore that. But every time they have purchased a large piece, a cup, a beaker, another mug, some interesting piece of early Chester silver, of which there isn't very much to begin with, there is less and less on the market. So it may take you, if you have an interest in Chester, 2 or 3 years to find something like this. This, I must confess, was purchased a couple of weeks ago as a Victorian London christening mug. They hadn't watched my videos on the troublesome leopard, and they got confused. This can happen with Chester silver. It can happen with all these provincial assay offices, particularly where there isn't a town mark. You may argue that because this bears not only a town mark but a whopper of one, that was something of an oversight. You might be right, but you can find things, but it will take a couple of years probably to find a nice bit of hollowware. Things like my friend's Marrow Scoop, in good condition. It's always in good condition with good marks. You might be lucky and find a piece like that once a year. Maybe if a little collection comes to auction, you get the opportunity to see 2 or 3 or 4 pieces. But honestly, if this has inspired you and you're from Chester and you think, I want to collect Chester, and the first auction you go to, there are 3 or 4 bits of it, and it's early like this and beautifully marked, that doesn't happen every year. It doesn't happen every 5 years. When you get into the 19th century and you're looking at flatware, yes, you can find it. A lot of it will not be produced in Chester. A lot of 19th century, early 19th century silver is produced either in Manchester or Liverpool or Salford, and it's sent to Chester. But I still think that's regional enough to call it proper Chester silver. It's working goldsmiths in the area. Lot of Liverpool registered. This mug, which is 18th century Chester, is by Joseph Whalley of Liverpool. So a lot of the money is in Liverpool, the trade is in Liverpool, goldsmiths worked in Liverpool. They did have earlier on their own system of hallmarking as well, unofficial system. We're not going to touch on that now. And then when you get into if you're on a budget and you just want a Chester hallmark, go and find, like a little schoolboy did, find a nice Vesta case or a sovereign holder or a card case. It'll have a Chester hallmark on it, and it'll date from 1880 up to about 1920 or something, and it won't be a fortune. Or if you're more of a purist, try and look for something by Low and Company in the 20th century with those prestige marks. They made sets of teaspoons. This is particularly nice. I think this is one of the better sort of commemorative Chester pieces that they made. But it is there, it is out there, but there isn't very much of it. And as a consequence, And I don't think people have really considered this, because they don't consider that paradox. They always think to themselves, well, there's lots of Chester silver about, but there isn't very much true Chester silver about. So remember that important 1854 date. Remember that up until that point, if you were working within the scope of Birmingham for 30 miles or 20 miles of Sheffield, you could not send your silver to Chester to be assayed. But after that, they did. And towards the end of the 19th century, they did it in absolute droves. That's enough for now. If I find something else, or as I did with Newcastle, I'll tack something on to the end next week or the week after. But for now, I hope that's been interesting. I hope I haven't bored you all to tears. And good antiques hunting, and goodbye.